Well, Joe, first of all, we'd like to, on behalf of the entire Railway Age and Simmons Boardman Publishing Corporation staff, we'd like to congratulate you on your selection as Railroader of the Year. And you are the first Amtrak president since Graham Claytor, the legendary Graham Claytor, was selected. It was way back in 1989. And your thoughts?
I'm humbled, Bill, that I'd be selected for something like this. I'm not an awards type of guy naturally, I think, and I know a lot of people aren't, but I appreciate the fact that it's really about the railroad, the women and the men here that really get the job done, and that we're making improvements on a regular basis, and that's a good thing for Amtrak.
Well, we've seen a steady improvement. We've seen, as you well know, the record ridership numbers, record revenues, and just the demand for the service is just growing and growing.
People today, I think, are ahead of their politicians in wanting, and I'm really kind of quoting our former chairman, Tom Carper, when I say that, is he really saw in Illinois the demand, the change that was happening in the entire Midwest for delivering something really new for the people, and that's a different mobility, and we're part of that, and we're really happy about being part of that.
Let's talk about your background. You are from upstate New York originally, from a farming community, I understand?
I grew up with 5 brothers and 2 sisters, and we operated a commercial dairy farm, my dad and my mother and my grandparents and the whole line of family. So you really kind of learned how to work early. You became productive kind of in your single digits, and then really began to do a man's work by the time you were 11 or 12 years old.
So from that background, tell me how you transitioned from there to transportation. And you spent most of your career in transportation.
Well, I guess it's my whole career, really. Other than the farming time and the military service, I really was in transportation. But let me tell you one story that just my dad walked out one day with me out of the barn, and we looked at Route 69 that goes by our farm, and there was a Greyhound bus went by, and I thought, there wasn't very many people on it, and I thought, that's kind of a waste of money. And my dad, who had grown up in the city of Rome, really said, you need to understand that there are a lot of people that need to get around that don't have a car, that don't have a way to get around. And it got me thinking about that fact and the necessity for connection.
It's been said, it's been observed by many that the presidency of Amtrak is maybe the toughest job in railroading because you have so many constituents. You have your passengers, you have your employees, you have Congress, which may or may not cooperate. You have an administration which may or may not be favorable to passenger rail. Would you agree with that assessment?
It's interesting, you know, each job that I've had, and I've taken a lot of jobs where there were major challenges, whether it was for FRA or whether it was some of the transit systems I operated and managed, led over the years, and each one has a set of circumstances that really gives you a lot of learning and understanding. I guess I have to say it this way, is that I'm really glad that I wasn't at Amtrak as the CEO when I was a lot younger than I am now, because it really allows you a certain element of freedom to do what you need to do and not think about where you might go for the future. And I think that has helped me understand all these different pressures and directions that come at you with the number of people that you have to satisfy or try to satisfy. Number one being the customer of Amtrak, those who really ride our trains. So I see the foundation here. Again, I'm going to be back to safety. Safety is the foundation for any transportation system, because if people don't trust the safety of your operation, your company, then your customers aren't going to flock to the trains, and we're seeing them come pretty well. I also have a very important role in increasing revenues and reducing costs. Congress wants that, and so does the public. They want to see a system that really produces efficiencies and provides a better service. Those are difficult things to do, but they're not insurmountable, and we're seeing that today. We're buying equipment, we're increasing our revenues, we're increasing our ridership, We're changing our direction. We actually have a strategy.
When you came to Amtrak 5 years ago, and you got a chance, of course, you had exposure to Amtrak as FRA administrator and in your role as transportation commissioner and previous positions in New York. When you came on board, what did you see as things that you wanted to accomplish? What did you see that needed to be changed or improved?
It's interesting, when you first come on board, you have a different impression than you have as you move along. I think that's true in any job, any role that one steps into, and you certainly wanted to increase ridership. One of the things that I had been advocating for during the Bush years was to increase the investment and get all the equipment that was on the sidelines on the track. Because if you remember, earlier in 2007, 2008, there was a crisis that we had to deal with as a nation to really deal with our financial crisis, but also a fuel cost crisis, those kinds of things which seem to keep reoccurring. The ridership actually was being demanded then, but you couldn't deliver it. So one of the first things I did when President Obama started and made some additional money available to railroading across the country was to rebuild everything I could possibly rebuild. Everything at Beech Grove, Indiana, which is our long distance shop, things here at Bear and at Wilmington and our Northeast Corridor services, rebuilt some P40s and made them like P42s, which is our main diesel fleet, so that we could actually increase the amount of capacity for our trains. So that's one of the things that I saw right away that was necessary and was a goal. We accomplished that goal, and we accomplished it under the deadline of the stimulus program. And we also accomplished a deadline of rebuilding some of the bridges and other infrastructure along the Northeast Corridor. The other thing that was, let me go back to something I said earlier. My desire was to get positive train control done. My expectation is that this company will, by the deadline, meet the positive train control, which is 2015, because we made early decisions when I got here to make that happen. We're moving along with it. Like I say, we will make the deadline on our own services. We need to make sure that we're doing it right with the freight railroads, and to the extent that we get the radio spectrum, which is still in question at this point in time, and whether you can get all of the equipment lined up logistically in the timely fashion and make those investments. I think that we have a very good relationship. And let me say something about the freights.
My next question.
We have an excellent relationship with the freights. I mean, they go far beyond for us in many cases. Oh, we fight with them on on-time performance, and we want to be running first like we're supposed to be, and all those kinds of things. But we've got good, solid people in these freight railroads that understand our needs, that look at what we need to get done, what they need to get done, and work with us.
Would you say that your biggest challenge with running on a freight, so I'm talking long distance services now, running on the freight rail system is dealing with their own problems, trying to add enough capacity? Because like Amtrak, their services are in growing demand. Just look at all the oil trains up on the BNSF and the Northern Corridor there. That's that's a business that has increased exponentially, and no one really expected it. Now all of a sudden, BNSF goes from 0 to 650,000 barrels of oil a day. And,
yes.
How do you deal with that?
I think it was at your conference, Bill, on the passenger on freight railroads, that I was listening to Rich Wexler, I think, really talk about the transit operation in Minneapolis, and whether they would really agree to that today had they known. They didn't know they were going to have that kind of growth. I think the biggest challenge with the freights is the same. Well, let me step back and just say, and it's something I said at that same conference, and one of the biggest challenges is continuing to have the relationship that Amtrak had in 1971 when it took over all these losing passenger services from the freight railroads, which helped the freight railroads at that point in time, with Staggers helping it even more in the 80s as it moved forward. So one of the challenges today, age-wise, is the new leaders that are coming out of the freights don't really understand that they were a railroad back then, not a freight railroad. And so they think of themselves today just as a freight railroad, but there's still a national need to have a connectivity with passenger railroads coast to coast and border to border for us. And that relationship, that partnership with the freight railroads, that's a continuing challenge. We got good leaders coming up in the freight railroads.
We sure do. Yeah.
But we also need to make sure that they understand that connection, that relationship still needs to be strong. We think it is. We think it'll get there, but we need to keep working on it.
You used the term subsidy before. You know, when people talk about Amtrak and about operating support or capital support, they use the word subsidy, and subsidy sort of has a negative connotation. And you know, I like to think of it as not subsidy; it's an investment. You know, how do you bridge that gap in perception? It's always been a struggle.
I think, and it's a really good question, Bill. When we're talking about a need we have for operating subsidy, operating availability payments, that's long distance service, the connectivity across this nation. And yet, Congress has never made the investment on capital in the Northeast Corridor. So those who support long distance argue that the Northeast Corridor needs as much subsidy as that they need for their long distance trains. That's not the right argument. The Northeast Corridor needs the investment and the infrastructure for the future, but so does the long distance services. Those investments in most cases are being made by the freight railroads.
For freight?
For
freight.
It's
about $13 billion a year.
$13 billion.
Private capital. Yeah.
And we use that investment by operating on those railroads. And we pay the private railroads for the use and then incentives for on-time performance. And they would argue that always that there would be more that we ought to be paying. I understand that. And yet what Congress and the public together need to get together on is the fact that if Amtrak goes away, and we have about 525 stations across the country, over 300 of them, we're the only service into those communities. So the economy in those communities, and you can see it in La Junta, Colorado, for example, on our Southwest Chief service, are fully dependent in many ways upon the ability to come in and out of their communities with rail and the connectivity to rail. And the other thing that I know to lead, you have to have logic, and you have to have compassion, and you have to have a clear direction of where you're going. Part of the compassion that our nation has, and yet isn't always expressed, is the fact that buses have gone away, aviation has gone away. The middle of our country, in a lot of ways today, needs an ability for those in my generation, I'll be 65, and those in front of me in age, to be able to travel other than on just interstate highways, because the buses aren't there. And the ability to go see their kids on one of the coasts, or their grandkids, or their great-grandchildren, is brought to them by Amtrak, because their neighbors can take them 100 miles to an Amtrak station, but they can't drive them the 600 or 800 or 1,000 miles to the coast. So there's a great deal of value that we're adding to this nation, just like we thought about, but we did this differently, I understand, when we had rural electrification to the farms and being a farm kid, understanding that that was never going to pay for itself in and of itself, but it brought a much better life to the rural communities across this country. We do the same.
Let's talk about investment on the capital side, looking forward maybe 5 years or so. Amtrak has a long-term plan for equipment and facilities. As you know, a railway age, our rail supply industry, which is very healthy, very strong readership. What can they look forward to from Amtrak? You know, they know what to expect from the freight railroads, but what can they expect from Amtrak in terms of investment beyond what you've already done with the electric locomotives and some of the improvements being made on the corridor and elsewhere?
I think what the first thing we know before we can get to 220 miles an hour and buy the trains to do 220 miles an hour, we got a lot of building to do. We also have something else we have to do, and that is we have to begin to supplement and then replace the Acela trains, which are our high-speed trains today. So you'll see an RFP going out in concert with California within the next few weeks to deliver, I think it's up to 28 different train sets for the Northeast over the next 5 years, and 5-6 years. And so there's a major investment there that we believe we can pay for, frankly, with money that comes from the Northeast corridor, both on the investment that we can make in those trains, and also and the ability to get future revenue that really is going to provide not just a payback for the investment, but also an additional number of dollars to make more capital investments in the Northeast corridor. One of the things we'd like to do, if we could, sooner rather than later, is to undercut the railroad between Washington and New York, which we're on right now, which is, we believe, is getting rougher than it should be. It hasn't been done in a while. So you completely undercut the main lines here, the high-speed lines, probably about $200 million, and it would take 4 years, maybe 3 years to get it done. Because the other thing people don't understand, you do, Bill, but is when you rebuild these things, you got to run the railroad while you're doing it. So there's a necessity for us not to do it all at once. In fact, Penn Station is the biggest bottleneck in our system on the Northeast corridor. We only get 55 hours of downtime for anything in that station a week. That's from Friday night till Monday morning, when everything that we're going to do to maintain it, replace anything, repair, whatever we're going to do, that's when it has to be done, whenever we're supporting the development. So the next big thing, other than cutting that railroad, undercutting the railroad, is to advance what we call the Gateway Project.
Right, the 2 additional tunnels and Portal Bridge.
Portal Bridge,
all that, yeah.
All the way from Newark right into New York. And I think after the recent problems that we've seen in Connecticut on their owned property run by Metro North, and the business community that I'm hearing from there, is that we have to figure out a way. That is the least expensive way to improve to reduce the time traveled between New York and Boston. Fix that section of 58 miles of railroad so that you can run at least at 110, where today we're being bottlenecked there as well. So we've got bottlenecks north of New York, and we got bottlenecks going into New York from the south. That's got to get fixed. Everybody wants to be at Penn Station. Everybody wants to be in New York.
Yeah,
is the financial capital of the world, and if they're going to stay there, this has got to get fixed.
You know, a lot of people talk about speed, you know, the maximum speed, but my perception, and this goes back to pre-Acela days when Amtrak was looking at high-speed train sets for the corridor, and the mantra there was, it's not about speed, it's about trip time. The passenger really doesn't care how fast you're going, unless you're a fan or something, and wow, look at that, we're going 200 miles an hour. But I think people are most concerned about the convenience, the comfort, the safety, and the amenities on board, but also just that trip time. That's what they care about, I think.
It's trip time and it's reliability. And the worry I have continually is safety and reliability. I mean, those are things we can knock off a few minutes from time to time, but making sure that people make their connections, and that's where you get the biggest frustration from folks. And you know, with the modern technology that we're dealing with today, I get direct email from customers that are held up on the trains that are operating today. I'm thinking to myself many times, I'm the first one that hears that the train is stopped, and you, not always, but if somebody has my email and they're on that train, they let me know right away, and then I go looking to see if we can make some improvements. People do want to make sure that they get to places on the time that we say that we're going. They want to. I know that the most important thing, bar none, is safety. You keep hearing that from me, but is something that culturally, when I came in here, that was part of how we addressed the folks, the unions, and the engagement of the workforce, and that is to bring something different in for safety. A behavioral safety program, which we call Safe to Safer, which is really critical because it also helps develop leaders, and the leaders are those who begin to notice things that could be changed and make a different commitment for the future, back to the same things we were talking about. So we know that for the future, we can reduce the time traveled on a continuing basis as we improve the railroad. We know in order to get to that 220 miles an hour, there needs to be a major change in the United States government policy of making investment in railroads. Whether it's here, or whether it's in California, or wherever it is. Those are nice to have, but we can't stop improving the existing railroad, and that's what we've set about and we are doing.
What's next for Joe Boardman? Looking ahead, I mean, we all hope you're going to be around for a long time to come. But what's next for you? What do you think? You thinking about that, or?
I plan on being here for as long as I can contribute what I think is needed to help provide for mentoring and succession for those behind me. I've got a great team and people that are really delivering at a senior level here in this company, changing our culture, getting to something very different for the future that will deliver a better railroad and a better experience for our customers, maintain our safety, and improve the bottom line.